Officer Jake Callahan was a man who hadn't cried in 5 years, not since the day he buried his own son. But on a cold, rainy night, a tiny, soaking wet puppy refused to let him go home. It barked, it clawed it, pulled him deep into the woods until he found what it was protecting. And when he shined his flashlight into the darkness, what he saw, the discovery, didn't just break his heart. It shattered his soul and left him weeping in the mud. What could a tiny stray possibly be guarding that would break a hardened cop? Stay with us. The truth will leave you speechless. Before we continue with Jake's story, we want to know where you are watching from. Drop your country or state in the comments below. We love seeing how far these stories of loyalty travel. And if you believe in the unbreakable bond between a rescuer and their animal, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories. The rain had just begun to fall. A cold, miserable drizzle that matched the mood inside the patrol car. Deputy Sheriff Jake Callahan, 45 years old and feeling every minute of it, sat parked on the shoulder of a lonely stretch of Old River Road. The forests of King County, Washington were already sinking into a deep, wet darkness. His 10-hour shift was finally over. The last call, a ridiculous argument between two grown men about a property line, had been the perfect sour end to a long week. All he wanted was the silence of his empty apartment, the burn of cheap whiskey, and to forget. Jake ran a hand over his tired face. 20 years on the force, and this is what it came down to. Arguing about fences. He was a ghost in his own life, a man just going through the motions. He remembered a time when the badge meant something, when he was eager, when he had a reason, but that was before the accident, before the small casket, before the day he and Sarah, his wife, stopped being Jake and Sarah and just became two people living in the same house, drowning in a silence louder than any siren. 5 years. 5 years since he'd held his son, Liam. 3 years old. The memory was a physical pain, a stone in his gut he'd learned to live with. Now, there was just the job. And the job was empty. He tossed his notepad onto the passenger seat, the leather squeaking in protest. The static of the radio was the only sound. 4 Adam 30, code 4, clear from the disturbance, 10 to 7 for the night. He didn't wait for the dispatcher's reply. He just wanted to go. He put the cruiser in drive, the wipers starting their rhythmic, hypnotic sweep. Home. Whatever that meant anymore. He drove slowly, not because he was being cautious, but because he had nowhere he truly wanted to be. Sarah was living with her sister in Tacoma now. They called it a separation. He called it the end. They hadn't known how to talk to each other after Liam was gone. How do you look at the person who shares the worst moment of your life? He'd poured himself into the job, extra shifts, overtime, anything to numb the part of his brain that kept replaying that rainy night, the sound of twisting metal, the sight of that small blue jacket. He clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Just get home, Jake, he muttered to himself. Just get home. He glanced in his rearview mirror, just a habit, scanning the empty dark road behind him, but it wasn't empty. There was a movement, a small frantic blur of motion keeping pace with his car. He frowned, squinting into the rain-streaked glass. It was a dog, a small, soaking wet, impossibly dirty little dog, a terrier mix of some kind, its fur matted with mud, and it was running, sprinting, right behind his cruiser. A heavy sigh escaped him. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Animal control was already closed for the night, and this was the last thing he needed. "Not my problem," he told himself. It was probably just some stray that got spooked. He tapped the accelerator, easing the car from 20 miles an hour to 25. "Go home, dog," he said to the mirror. "Go on." But the dog didn't go home. It sped up. Its small legs moved in a desperate, blurry rhythm, and then it started barking. A thin, reedy yelp that barely cut through the sound of the rain and the engine. Yip, yip, yip! It was the most annoying, persistent sound he had ever heard. He sped up again, 30 miles an hour. The dog still kept up, its barks growing more frantic. Then the creature did the unthinkable. It swerved, running in front of the patrol car, right into his headlights. Jake slammed on the brakes. The cruiser fishtailed on the wet pavement, tires screaming in protest, stopping just inches from the tiny, trembling animal. The dog stood its ground, panting, staring at him. Jake's heart hammered, not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. "Are you insane?" he roared, his voice filling the car. "You trying to get killed?" The exhaustion, the grief, the frustration of the night, it all boiled over. He was furious, furious at this stupid, insignificant dog for making him feel something. He sat there for a long moment, the rain lashing the windshield, the dog just staring at him. It didn't look scared, it looked determined. Jake's anger began to fade, replaced by that familiar, cold numbness. This was just another problem, another piece of pointless paperwork in a life full of it. He'd have to catch it, try to find a 24-hour shelter, or worse, bring it to the station and listen to it whine all night. "Fine," he growled. "You win." Jake grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out into the pouring rain. The cold hit him instantly. "All right, come on. Let's get this over with," he said, his voice flat. He expected the dog to cower or run. He reached for his radio to call it in. Maybe Animal Control had an after-hours line, but the dog, let's call him Scrappy, did something strange. As soon as Jake's boots hit the pavement, Scrappy barked once, a sharp commanding sound. Then he turned and sprinted away from Jake, not down the road, but straight toward the dense black wall of trees. He stopped right at the edge of the forest, half hidden by ferns, and barked again. "Woof!" He looked right at Jake. It wasn't a come-play bark. It was a come-now bark. Jake stopped, his hand on his radio. "What? Are you kidding me?" He sighed, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "You want me to follow you into that—" He was done. This was too much. He raised his radio to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is 4 Adam 30. I'm on Old River Road, mile marker 3. I've got a stray dog. Acting erratically. It seems to be—" He never finished the call. Before he could say requesting animal control, the little dog was back. Scrappy bolted from the trees, a small muddy missile. He ran right up to Jake and bit him. Not a real bite, but he clamped his small, surprisingly strong jaws onto the cuff of Jake's uniform pants, and he pulled. He dug his paws into the gravel, growling, a deep, desperate sound from such a tiny body. He yanked and pulled, whining, looking back toward the woods and then at Jake. Jake stood frozen. All the annoyance, all the exhaustion, vanished. He was a cop, but he was also a dog lover. He'd seen panicked dogs, aggressive dogs, and lost dogs. This was none of those. This was communication. The desperation in that pull, the frantic, intelligent urgency in the dog's eyes, it was undeniable. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a dog being a nuisance. This was a creature screaming for help, the only way it knew how. A chill ran down Jake's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. "All right," he said, his voice quiet. Okay, I'm coming." Jake lowered the radio. His thumb hovered over the button. He should call it in. Let Animal Control handle it. That was the procedure. That was the job. But the little dog, Scrappy, was still standing there shivering violently in the rain, staring at him. And in its eyes, Jake saw something that cut through the numbness. He saw that same desperate, terrifying hope he remembered seeing in the mirror every morning for the first year after Liam was gone. "Dispatch, disregard," he said finally, his voice rough. 4 Adam 30 is 10-6. I'm investigating a possible animal issue." He clipped the radio back to his vest before the dispatcher could ask what that meant. "Fine," he said to the dog. "Fine. You win." He wasn't doing this as a cop. He was doing this because he was too tired to fight the feeling that he had to. He knew the routine. He'd seen this on late-night animal rescue shows. The dog would lead him 20 yards into the trees, and he'd find its mother caught in a snare or fallen down a ditch. A simple, sad, solvable problem. He grabbed his heavy black-issued flashlight from his belt, its metal cold against his palm. He clicked it on. The powerful beam cut a perfect bright circle into the soaking darkness. "All right, Scrappy, show me what's so important." The second the words left his mouth, the dog yipped. It was a sharp, triumphant sound. Then it spun around and vanished into the wall of shadows. Jake took one last long look at the warm, dry interior of his patrol car. He sighed, pulling his jacket collar tighter, and stepped off the gravel road. The forest floor wasn't a trail. It was a tangle of wet ferns, slick moss, and fallen branches. The air was instantly colder thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. Raindrops dripped from the massive Douglas firs, sounding louder than the storm itself. "This is a mistake," Jake muttered, his boots sinking into the mud. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating a chaotic, dripping green and black world, but Scrappy moved with an eerie, unnatural purpose. This wasn't the clumsy, panicked scrambling of a lost puppy. The little dog knew exactly where it was going. It navigated the treacherous terrain like it was born in it, leaping over rotting logs and darting through thickets of thorns that snagged at Jake's uniform. Every few seconds it would stop, pause just long enough to see the beam of Jake's light, and then bark. That same impatient, demanding yelp. "Come on!" Jake grunted, hoisting himself over a large, mossy log. His boot slipped on the other side, sending a shock of icy water up his leg. He bit back a curse. "I swear, Scrappy," he called out into the darkness, his voice tight with irritation. "If I get all the way out here, and this is about a raccoon stuck in a tree, I am personally driving you to the shelter. You hear me?" He was talking to a dog. He was cold, wet, and talking to a dog in the middle of the woods at the end of a 10-hour shift. The absurdity of it, the deep, profound loneliness of the moment, settled on him like a shroud. "You've got 5 minutes," Jake announced to the shadows. 5 minutes. That's it. Then I'm turning back and you're on your own. He said it forcefully. He wanted to mean it, but Scrappy didn't seem to care about his timeline. The moment Jake cleared the log, the puppy was off again. A tiny, determined shadow disappearing deeper into the brush. Jake pushed forward, frustration mixing with a cold, tiny spark of adrenaline. The dog wasn't just leading him, it was pulling him, with an invisible leash of pure, desperate will. This felt different. He just didn't know why. "Scrappy," he called out, his light sweeping the area. For a heart-stopping second, the forest was empty. The dog was gone. "Scrappy, damn it! Yip, yip." The bark was further ahead, deeper and lower, down a steep incline. Jake's light found the edge of a muddy embankment. The dog was at the bottom, looking up. "You've got to be..." Jake stopped. He didn't hear the dog anymore. He heard something else. A new sound, carried on the wind. It was faint and chillingly familiar. It was music, a thin, repetitive electronic melody. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The path, if you could even call it a trail, vanished almost the instant he stepped off the road. The towering canopy of pine and cedar trees swallowed what little twilight was left, plunging the world into a thick, wet, oppressive dark. The only thing that existed was the bouncing white circle from his flashlight, cutting a lonely cone through the rain. The air grew heavy, colder. The steady drizzle wasn't just a drizzle anymore. It was a persistent, miserable rain that soaked through the shoulders of his uniform jacket, chilling him to the bone. "Great," Jake muttered under his breath, wiping a stream of cold water from his face. "Just perfect." The ground beneath his feet changed. Solid earth gave way to a thick, greedy mud. Every step was a battle. His heavy boots made a sickening, sucking sound as he pulled them free, only to sink again, ankle deep. He was walking blind, completely at the mercy of the little dog's barks, which were always just ahead. "Scrappy! Slow down!" he yelled. His right boot suddenly found nothing but air. He slipped, his ankle twisting painfully. He threw his arms out and catching himself on a moss-covered, rotting log. His flashlight beam spinning wildly into the blackness. His heart hammered in his chest. He was a 45-year-old deputy, and he'd almost broken his ankle chasing a ghost. He pushed himself up, his knees and one hand now caked in the foul-smelling mud. He was breathing hard. "This is insane," he said out loud, needing to hear his own voice to break the spell. "This is completely insane. I'm done." He took one step, and a low-hanging branch, invisible in the dark, snapped back and whipped across his face. The sting was sharp, immediate. He tasted the copper tang of blood on his lip. Anger flared, hot and sharp. "That's it," he yelled into the void. "I'm done. Go find someone else. You little—" He turned, ready to climb back up the slope, ready to go back to his car, but he didn't know which way was up. In his fall, he'd lost his bearings. There was only darkness. He spun in a slow circle, the flashlight beam cutting through the rain. Nothing, just trees and mud and more trees. He was lost. A 20-year veteran, lost in his own jurisdiction by a dog the size of his boot. Yip, yip. The bark was close. Jake turned his light toward the sound. Scrappy was sitting just 10 feet away, head tilted, as if waiting. "You," Jake started, but the frustration died, replaced by sheer exhaustion. He took a step toward the dog, and his foot plunged straight into ice-cold, moving water. He gasped as the creek flooded his boot. He'd stumbled right into a shallow, fast-running gully. The cold was instant, seeping into his bones. He stood there, defeated, soaked, bleeding, and completely, utterly miserable. This night could not possibly get any worse. But Scrappy didn't seem to notice the rain. He didn't slip on the mud. He didn't stumble into the creek. The tiny dog moved like a phantom. He was a blur of motion at the edge of Jake's light. While Jake fought the terrain, Scrappy used it. He bounded effortlessly over the same rotting logs Jake had to climb. He darted through the thickets of thorny bushes that tore at Jake's uniform. He navigated the slippery, algae-covered rocks of the creek as if they were stepping stones, placed there just for him, and he never, ever stopped communicating. He would sprint 10 yards ahead, a small dark shape disappearing into the rain, and then stop. He'd wait, panting, his small body trembling, until Jake's heavy footsteps and muttered curses caught up. The second Jake got too close, the dog would let out that sharp, impatient yip. Woof! It wasn't a come-play bark. It was an order. Hurry up. This is important. Then he would run back toward Jake, circle his legs, a whirlwind of wet fur, and then sprint off into the darkness again. He was a living beacon, a four-legged tour guide to hell. Jake pulled his boot out of the creek with a heavy, water-logged schloop. He was freezing. He was miserable, but as he watched the little dog, something else was happening. The anger was fading. The deep, heavy regret was lifting. It was being replaced by something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A powerful, nagging curiosity. This was not normal. He had seen dogs do amazing things. He'd worked with K9 units. He'd seen loyalty, but this was different. This wasn't just instinct. This was intelligence. This was a mission. The sheer, unbelievable will of this tiny creature, fighting the same storm, the same darkness, but without an ounce of hesitation. It was astonishing. "All right," Jake said, his voice softer now, pushing the wet hair off his forehead. "All right, I'm coming." He climbed out of the gully, his soaked pant leg flapping heavily against his skin. "I'm coming. Show me." Scrappy yipped once more, a sound of approval this time, and darted ahead. Jake followed. He was no longer a cop ending a shift. He was no longer a grieving man running from his past. He was just a man following a dog. And for the first time, he needed to know where this path ended. It felt like they had been walking for an hour. Jake checked his watch. The illuminated dial showed it had only been 9 minutes. 9 minutes. It felt like an eternity. His legs were burning. His lungs ached from the cold, wet air. The ankle he'd twisted earlier throbbed with every agonizing step. He was soaked through, not just his jacket, but his vest, his shirt. He was pretty sure he couldn't feel his toes anymore. This was pointless. He stopped, bracing one hand against a massive, slick-barked cedar tree just to stay upright. He was panting, hard, his breath pluming in the beam of his flashlight like smoke. "That's it!" he finally shouted into the darkness, his voice raw and angry. "Enough time is up, Scrappy. I'm done." The little dog was standing about 15 feet ahead, half hidden by a giant fern, looking back at him. That same insane, impatient look on its face. It let out another sharp yip, as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" "No," Jake yelled, pointing a shaky finger. "Bad dog, I'm done. I'm going back." He was trying to convince himself, not the dog. He was turning around. He was going back to his warm cruiser. He was going home. He didn't care about the dog anymore. He didn't care about anything. He just wanted this to be over. He took a heavy step, pulling his boot from the mud, ready to retreat, but he stopped. He froze, his head tilted, holding his breath. What? Over the steady, depressing drum of the rain on the leaves, there it was, a new sound. It was so faint, so thin. He was sure he was imagining it. He thought it was the rain or the wind, but it wasn't. It was music, a high-pitched, tinny, repetitive melody, a nursery rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star. The sound was coming from below, deeper in the darkness where the dog was waiting. Jake's blood, which had been circulating slowly, sluggishly, instantly turned to ice. His heart, which had been a dull, tired ache in his chest, suddenly hammered against his ribs. One single, terrifying thought pushed every last shred of exhaustion out of his mind. That's not an animal. That's not a lost dog's mother. Someone is down there. The cop took over. In less than a second, the tired, grieving, numb man named Jake Callahan vanished, and Deputy Sheriff Callahan took his place. His training, buried under 5 years of grief, kicked in like a switch had been flipped. Click. His thumb found the button on his flashlight. The powerful beam died, plunging him into a sudden, total, tactical darkness. His hand moved, smoothly, automatically, from the flashlight to the cold, hard, familiar grip of his service weapon. He didn't unholster it. Not yet, but his fingers wrapped around the handle, his thumb resting on the strap. He stood perfectly still, listening. There was only the rain, the wind, and the music. How I wonder what you are. Then, from the blackness just below him, Scrappy growled. It was a completely new sound. It wasn't the impatient, high-pitched yip. It was a low, deep, threatening rumble. It was the sound of a guard dog, a protector. The little dog was confirming what Jake's pounding heart already knew. They were not alone, and there was danger. Jake took a slow, silent breath. The cold, the mud, the rain, none of it mattered anymore. He was no longer a man going home. He was a cop on a call. He whispered 2 words into the darkness, his voice low, tight, and absolute. Lead the way. Scrappy didn't wait. The moment Jake whispered, lead the way, the dog was off, a low growl still rumbling in his chest. Jake moved behind him, his boots silent in the deep mud. The rain was his cover. He was moving blind, relying completely on the sound of the dog and the faint, horrifying melody of that children's song, Twinkle, Twinkle. The music grew slightly louder, but it was distorted, skipping, like a broken record. Scrappy led him through a final dense wall of wet ferns. The ground suddenly just ended. Jake stopped dead, his front boot hovering over nothing. He'd almost walked right off the edge. He was standing on the lip of a ravine, a steep, almost vertical drop that fell away into total blackness. It was a scar in the earth, completely invisible from the road, hidden by a curtain of ancient pine trees and thorny blackberry bushes. He was just a cop, a man, standing in the dark, breathing in the cold, wet air. But now, he could smell it. It wasn't just the smell of pine and rain anymore. It was something sharp, something chemical, the unmistakable, acrid smell of gasoline. And beneath that, the hot, burnt scent of brake fluid. His heart, which was already pounding, now felt like it was trying to escape his chest. He looked down at Scrappy. The little dog was standing right at the edge, paws planted firmly, staring down into the dark, whining. That low, desperate, pleading sound. Jake knew. Before he even saw it, he knew. He unclipped his flashlight. He had to see. He took a stabilizing step back, aimed the heavy flashlight down into the abyss, and clicked it on. The beam, a powerful, focused white light, cut through the rain and the darkness. It sliced past the wet branches, past the tangles of vines, and it hit metal. Jake's blood ran cold. He angled the light further down, 50 feet below. maybe more. Wedged between two massive cedar trees was the wreckage. A dark blue SUV, crumpled like a tin can, was resting on its roof. It was perfectly hidden, completely, totally invisible from the road. No one would have ever found this. Not in a week, not in a month. The trees had swallowed it whole. "Oh my God," he whispered. The words were stolen by the wind. He swept the light back and forth. The vehicle was mangled. The front end was crushed against one of the trees. The roof was flattened. Rain was pooling on the undercarriage. He could see where it had torn through the blackberry bushes on its way down. A violent, dark scar in the earth. This wasn't just an accident. This was a tomb. Scrappy whined again, louder, pawing at the dirt, desperate. Jake understood. The dog hadn't been warning him of a threat. He was warning him about this. He wasn't a guard dog. He was a rescue dog. The music was still playing. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Someone was in that car. Jake's training, his professionalism, slammed back into place. The shock evaporated, replaced by pure, focused adrenaline. He fumbled for the radio on his shoulder, his hands suddenly shaking, not with fear, but with urgency. He thumbed the button. 4 Adam 30 to dispatch 4 Adam 30. I have an active 1050, I repeat. 50. An active 1050 rollover. Vehicle versus trees. His voice was loud, cutting through the night. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, thin, full of static. 4 Adam 30. Your 1020 is unclear. Repeat location. Damn it! Jake yelled. The ravine. The trees. The signal was weak. He climbed half a step back up the bank, holding the radio high. Dispatch. Can you hear me now? Affirmative. 4 Adam 30. Barely. What is your location? Old River Road mile marker 3.2, about 100 yards east of the road, down a ravine. I have a dark blue SUV. Overturned. It's bad. Real bad. He was panting, the words tumbling out. I need fire. I need EMS. I need everyone. Expedite now. Copy. 4 Adam 30. Units en route. Can you confirm occupants? Jake's light was already sweeping the vehicle again. Negative. Dispatch. I can't see. Wait. He squinted. The beam landed on the driver's side door. It was crushed, but he could see an arm, a pale hand, dangling lifelessly from the shattered window. His stomach dropped. Dispatch. I have at least one occupant. Pinned. Unresponsive. The vehicle is not stable. Copy. Deputy. Help is on the way. The radio went silent, but the music kept playing. How I wonder what you are. Jake looked at the sheer 50-foot drop. It was all mud, slick rock, and tangled roots. The rescue team would take minutes to get here, and more minutes to set up ropes. He didn't have minutes. He looked at Scrappy. The dog was already halfway down the slope, scrambling, sliding, stopping to look back at him. I'm coming, Jake said, his voice tight. He put his radio back. He didn't think about his bad ankle. He didn't think about the cold or the rain. He only thought about the music. He planted his boot, grabbed a thick root, and stepped off the edge into the darkness. Jake didn't wait. He couldn't. The sirens were distant, too far away. Minutes. Minutes he knew he didn't have. That horrible, tinny music. Twinkle, twinkle, little star was a beacon. It was a metronome, counting down the seconds of someone's life. He holstered his sidearm, his mind clear and cold. He looked at the 50-foot drop. It wasn't a climb. It was a controlled fall. He grabbed a thick root that snaked over the edge, tested it with his weight, and swung his body into the abyss. His boots found no purchase. There was only slick, black mud and loose rock. He was sliding, not climbing. He plunged down the embankment, desperately grabbing at anything, a handful of thorny vines, a sharp piece of slate, a root that ripped from the earth the moment he touched it. He was an avalanche of mud and displaced rock. Rain lashed his face, stinging his eyes, blurring his vision. He could hear Scrappy, somewhere below him. The dog was fast, agile, a ghost in the darkness. While Jake fought the ravine, Scrappy descended it. The little dog bounded from rock to root, his claws finding purchase where Jake's heavy boots just slipped. He'd stop, look up at the clumsy sliding human, and let out that sharp, frantic bark. Hurry! Hurry! It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. I'm trying, Jake yelled, his voice ripped away by the wind. His left foot snagged on a hidden root, twisting his ankle. Pain, white hot and immediate, shot up his leg. He cried out, pitching forward. He slammed his shoulder hard against the trunk of a half-uprooted tree, the impact knocking the wind straight from his lungs. He hung there for a moment, gasping, clinging to the slick bark, the world spinning. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now, thick, choking. And the music, God, the music. It was so much louder. Up above the world so high, it was coming from right below him. He ignored the searing pain in his ankle. He ignored the throb in his shoulder. He let go of the tree. He slid, half falling, the last 20 feet, landing hard in a deep pool of icy water, mud, and shattered glass. He was at the bottom. The wrecked SUV loomed over him like a dead animal. He was soaked, covered in filth, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, but he was there. Scrappy was already on top of the wreckage, pacing frantically on the overturned chassis, barking, not at Jake, but at the crushed metal beneath his paws. Jake pushed himself to his feet, his flashlight beam steady now, cutting through the downpour. The scene was worse up close. The roof was crushed flat. The silence, under the music, was deafening. He pushed himself up, his bad ankle screaming in protest, the icy water from the creek sloshing in his boot. Every instinct told him to stay put, to wait for the rescue team, but the music, like a diamond in the sky. It was a desperate tiny pulse in the middle of all this death and destruction. He had to move. Scrappy, he called out, his voice hoarse. The dog was already at the driver's side, pawing at the mangled door, whining. Jake limped through the wreckage, shards of glass crunching under his boots like broken ice. The smell of gasoline was so strong here it burned his throat. He stumbled, catching himself on a piece of torn metal, his flashlight beam cutting through the rain. He reached the driver's side. It was gone. The door was crushed inward, pushed halfway into the driver's seat. The window was a spider web of shattered glass, blown outward. Ma'am, he called out. Sheriff's Department, can you hear me? Only the rain and the music. He braced himself against the wet, overturned chassis, his heart hammering. He leaned in, shining his light through the jagged hole where the window used to be, and he saw her. She was young, maybe 30, 35, dark hair, matted with mud, and something else, something dark. She was pinned forward, her head resting on the steering wheel at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were closed. She was so still. A wedding ring glinted on her left hand, caught in the beam of his light. Ma'am, he said again, softer this time. My name is Deputy Callahan. Help is on the way. He reached a gloved hand through the broken window, pushing aside a curtain of glittering, broken glass. He had to check. He had to know. His fingers, trembling slightly, touched her neck, searching for a pulse. There was nothing. He pressed harder, moving his fingers, desperate. Please. There was only cold, wet skin. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. He'd seen death more times than he could count. He was a cop. This was the job. But this, the isolation, the violence of the crash, and that music. He leaned back, resting his forehead against the cold metal of the SUV. He squeezed his eyes shut. God, he was too late. All this, the chase, the fall, the mud, for nothing. He was too late. He was always too late. The little dog, Scrappy, was still whining, not at the woman, but at the back of the car. Jake opened his eyes, the rain and the terrible, tinny music pulling him back. He was still a cop. He still had a job to do. One occupant, he whispered to himself, preparing his report for the medics. Female, 30s, DOA. He took a deep breath, pushing the grief down, locking it back in the box where it belonged. He had to clear the scene. He had to check the rest of the car, even though he was sure he was the only living thing, besides the dog, for miles. Jake limped forward, his bad ankle sending bolts of agony up his leg, but he ignored it. The smell of gasoline was terrifyingly strong. He reached the driver's side. A mangled mess of torn metal and shattered glass. Scrappy was there, whining, pawing at the crushed door. But Jake's eyes were fixed on the darkness inside. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Sheriff's Department, can you hear me?" The only reply was the hiss of the rain and that music. That horrible, broken music. He braced his hand on the overturned chassis, the metal cold and slick beneath his glove. He leaned in, pushing his flashlight beam through the jagged hole where the window should have been. He saw her. She was young, maybe in her early 30s. Her dark hair was matted with rain and blood, obscuring her face. She was pinned forward by the steering column. Her body slumped at an impossible, unnatural angle. Her eyes were closed. In the stark white beam of his light, he could see a simple gold wedding band on her left hand. She was so terribly still. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "My name is Deputy Callahan. Help is on the way." But he knew. He was a cop. He'd seen this 100 times. He knew. He had to be sure. It was the procedure. It was the job. He took a sharp, steadying breath. He carefully reached his gloved hand through the broken window, pushing aside a curtain of glittering glass that tinkled like wind chimes. His fingers, shaking almost imperceptibly, found her neck, just below the jawline, pressing against the cold skin, searching, praying for the faint, thready beat of a pulse. Nothing. He pressed harder, sliding his fingers. "Come on, come on." Nothing. Just cold, wet, unresponsive skin. He pulled his hand back as if the cold had burned him. Dead. The word echoed in his mind. DOA. Dead on arrival. He staggered back a step, his bad ankle giving way. He fell against the muddy embankment, his flashlight beam pointing uselessly at the sky. A familiar, heavy, suffocating blanket of failure settled over him. He was too late. All of it. The chase, the rain, the fall, the mud. All of it. For nothing. He had failed, just like he'd failed 5 years ago. The same sick, hollow feeling. He was always too late. He squeezed his eyes shut, resting his head in his hands, the mud and rain mixing on his face. "God," he breathed. It was over, but it wasn't. Above the sound of the wind, above the hammering of his own heart, the music played on. That grotesque, cheerful, relentless melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It was coming from inside the car. That horrible, shark-mocking nursery rhyme. It was the only sign of life in a tomb of twisted metal. Start with the sound of the tinny music. Twinkle, twinkle. Then a sharp, frantic bark. Jake was still leaning against the embankment, lost in that cold, familiar fog of failure when the barking shattered his grief. It wasn't the come-on bark from the woods. It wasn't the low warning growl. This was a shriek, a desperate, high-pitched, frantic sound. "Scrappy, stop it!" Jake yelled, his voice thick. He thought the dog was reacting to the body, to the death. "It's over, pup. We're too late." But when he lifted his flashlight, his blood froze all over again. Scrappy wasn't at the driver's side. He wasn't near the woman at all. The little dog was at the back of the SUV, on the passenger side, clawing frantically at the rear door. He was digging at the metal, his claws scraping and screeching. He'd leap up, bite the door handle, fall back, and then launch himself at it again, barking, screaming, his entire tiny body a blur of focused, desperate energy. Jake pushed himself to his feet, his mind struggling to catch up. "What was it doing, Scrappy?" he commanded, limping closer. "Heel. There's nothing back there." He reached the back of the car. The music was louder here, definitely coming from the back seat. Scrappy ignored him. The dog was possessed. He was trying to dig through the metal door, whining, crying, a sound of absolute agony. Jake shined the light on the dog. "Hey!" he yelled, grabbing Scrappy by the scruff of his neck. The dog was trembling, his muscles coiled like tight springs. "Stop it," Jake said, his voice breaking. She's dead, pup. It's over. We can't help her." He was talking to the dog, but he was really talking to himself, to the ghost of his son. "It's over." He tried to pull Scrappy away from the door, but the dog went rigid, growling at him now, twisting in his grip, fighting to get back to that door. Jake was stunned. He dropped the dog. Scrappy immediately slammed his body against the door again, clawing, biting. Jake just stood there, confused. His mind was thick. It didn't make sense. The dog wasn't reacting to the body. It was reacting to the music. "What?" Jake whispered. He shined his flashlight at the back window. It was shattered, but the tint was so dark he couldn't see inside. "There's nothing in there, Scrappy," he insisted, his frustration returning. "It's just the radio, or a toy." But Scrappy looked at him, his eyes wild in the flashlight beam, and let out a bark so full of pain and accusation that it hit Jake like a physical blow. The dog was not confused. The dog was not wrong. Jake was. Scrappy didn't just bark. He screamed. It was a sound of pure, primal agony. He slammed his tiny body against the rear passenger door, clawing at the metal, his nails making a horrible screeching sound. Scree, scree, bark. And Jake, frozen in his grief, finally heard it. The music. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It wasn't just in the car. It was coming from the back seat. The dead woman was in the front. Scrappy was at the back. The music was at the back. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat. "No," he whispered. It wasn't possible. "No!" He was moving before his brain gave the command. He shoved himself off the muddy bank, his bad ankle screaming in protest, but he didn't feel the pain. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded his system. He stumbled, half limping, half running, through the wreckage, past the mangled driver's side, his flashlight beam fixed on that rear door. Scrappy was a blur of motion, a fury of mud and rain, and desperate, terrified energy. "Okay," Jake panted. "Okay, I'm here." He reached the door. He grabbed the handle. It was crushed, jammed tight against the frame from the impact. It wouldn't budge. He pulled again, putting all his weight into it, roaring with effort. The metal groaned, but it held fast. The music was so loud now, up above the world so high. Scrappy was at his feet, jumping, barking, looking from Jake to the door. "I'm trying," Jake yelled. "I'm trying." He couldn't get in. The door was sealed. He saw the window. It was tinted dark, shattered into 1,000 tiny cubes, but still held in place. "Scrappy, back," he commanded. "Get back now." The dog, for the first time, obeyed. He scrambled back into the darkness. Jake didn't hesitate. He dropped his flashlight, letting it spill light onto the mud. He gripped his heavy steel-issued baton from his belt. With a sharp flick of his wrist, it extended with a menacing click. He raised it high. "Hang on," he yelled, to whoever, whatever, was inside. He slammed the baton against the safety glass. The sound was deafening. A hollow, sickening thud. The glass held. He struck it again. Thud, and again. Thud. His shoulder, the one he'd hit on the way down, exploded in pain. He didn't care. He roared, a sound of pure rage and desperation, and brought the baton down one last time, with every ounce of strength he had left. The window exploded. A shower of dark, glittering glass pellets cascaded into the car and onto the mud at his feet. The car was open. The way was clear. And the music was suddenly, horribly loud. Like a diamond in the sky. He was gasping, his lungs burning, the jagged hole of the window gaping black in front of him. Jake thrust his flashlight into the dark, cramped space. The powerful beam landed on the headliner, the floor of the car, now covered in mud, shattered to gossip, and wet leaves. And then the light found it. It was a child's car seat. It was hanging upside down, suspended from the roof by its taut safety straps like a horrible, dark cocoon. The air punched out of Jake's lungs. No. The word wasn't a word. It was a gasp, a denial. No, no, please God, no. The image, 5 years old but never faded, slammed into him. Another car, another rainy night, the sight of another car seat, Liam's car seat. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the memory down. Not now, not again. Stay focused. He stopped being a man. He became a machine. He lunged at the opening, forcing his broad shoulders through the jagged, broken window. Shards of glass tore at his rain jacket, at the skin on his hands, but he didn't feel the pain. He was inside. The smell of gasoline, oil, and rain was suffocating. The music was deafening. It was insane. It was inside the car with him. How I wonder what you are. He reached the hanging seat. It was jammed tight. The seatbelt lock buckled by the force of the crash. He yanked at it. It wouldn't move. Outside, Scrappy was shrieking, a frantic, terrified sound. I'm trying, Jake roared. He fumbled at his belt, his fingers numb, clumsy. His rescue knife. He clicked the blade open, plunging it into the thick nylon strap. He sawed at it, 1 cut, 2 cuts, and he froze. He held his breath, over the music, over the rain, over the desperate pounding of his own blood. He heard it. Music stops. Sound of a tiny, faint gasp. A breath. It was a tiny, shallow, wet gasp, but it was there. Hang on, he screamed, his voice cracking. Hang on, I've got you. He sliced through the last fibers of the strap. The heavy seat broke free, crashing down onto the debris-covered roof. He grabbed it, his hands shaking so violently he could barely keep his grip. He dragged it, heavy and awkward, back toward the broken window, shoving it through the hole, pushing it out into the cold, clean rain. He scrambled out after it, half falling, landing on his back in the mud and rocks. He was panting, crying. He didn't know which. He grabbed his flashlight, aiming the beam at the seat. He fumbled with the 5-point harness, his fingers stiff, useless. Come on, come on. He tore the straps open. And inside, curled into a tiny, perfect ball, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 2 years old. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, her eyes closed. She was unconscious, but her little chest was moving. A tiny, fragile, up and down. She was breathing. She was alive, and clutched tightly, desperately, in her small, perfect hand was a dirty, stuffed, white lamb. The music, twinkle, twinkle, little star, was coming from the lamb. Jake just stared, his beam trembling on the tiny, dirt-streaked face. She was so small. The music, that horrible, broken music, was still playing. Twinkle, twinkle. He was frozen, paralyzed. His mind couldn't connect the dead woman in the front with this. No, he whispered, but the word was a gasp, a prayer. Scrappy scrambled over the wreckage, shoving his muddy body past Jake's legs. The dog didn't hesitate. He lunged at the car seat, not biting, but nosing, pushing, whining. He licked the baby's pale cheek, a frantic, loving, desperate gesture, and the baby coughed. It was a tiny choked sound, a small agonizing gasp for air. Her eyes fluttered, just for a second. Jake's 5 years of numbness, the thick, cold ice around his heart, shattered, like the glass all around him. She's alive, he yelled, not to anyone, but to the trees, to the rain, to God. She's alive. He tore at his own jacket, the heavy, rain-soaked police coat. He ripped the zipper down, shrugging it off his shoulders, ignoring the freezing rain that immediately soaked his uniform. He threw the jacket over the baby. Then, gently, so gently his hands ached, he scooped her up. He pulled her out of the car seat, out of the wreckage, out of the tomb. He pulled her tight against his chest, shielding her small, fragile body from the storm with his own. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm here, little girl." He rocked her, back and forth, in the mud and the grit, his feet unsteady, his heart exploding. "I've got you. You're safe." The baby, nestled against the warmth of his chest, took another shallow breath, her tiny face screwed up, and she began to cry. It wasn't a loud cry. It was a weak, trembling, angry little wail. But it was the most beautiful sound Jake had ever heard. It was the sound of life. Scrappy was at his feet now, jumping, yipping, trying to lick her face, trying to lick Jake's hands, a tiny whirlwind of pure ecstatic joy. "You did it," Jake whispered to the dog, his voice choked. "You crazy, stubborn, beautiful dog, you did it." He held the crying child, his entire body shaking. He looked down at her face, her tiny perfect features, and then he looked at Scrappy, the muddy, exhausted, triumphant little dog, and the walls he had built, the dam he had maintained for 5 agonizing years, finally broke. The image slammed into his mind, unwanted, unstoppable. Another night, another crash, more rain, the smell of gasoline, just like this. He wasn't a cop then. He was just a dad, clawing at the door of his own overturned car, screaming his wife's name, Sarah. And then, seeing it. The other car, the one that had run the light, and in the back, the blue car seat, Liam's car seat. He remembered the silence, the horrible, final silence. He remembered pulling his 3-year-old son from the wreckage, just like this. He remembered trying, begging, doing CPR until his own lungs burned, but it was too late. He had been too late. He had failed his son. He had failed his wife. He had failed everything. But this... He looked down at the baby in his arms. Her cry was getting stronger. She was warm. She was alive. He hadn't been too late. He looked at Scrappy. This insignificant, half-drowned rat of a dog. This dog had run at a police car. It had bitten a uniformed officer. It had refused to take no for an answer. It had refused to let Jake fail. It had dragged him, kicking and screaming, into this ravine, into this memory, and forced him to find a different ending. Jake's knees buckled. He collapsed, dropping to his knees in the thick, cold mud, his flashlight forgotten, the beam pointing at nothing. He hunched over, pulling the baby tighter against his chest, a single, choked sob ripping out of him. And then he wept. He wept for the woman in the car. He wept for the little girl who was now an orphan. He wept for the 5 years of silence, for the empty apartment, for the bottle of whiskey waiting on his counter. But mostly, he wept for the little boy in the blue jacket, the one he couldn't save. The tears, the ones he hadn't allowed himself to shed, came in agonizing, cleansing waves. He cried, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs, his shoulders shaking, the sound lost in the storm. Scrappy crept forward, whining softly, and pressed his cold, wet nose against Jake's cheek, licking the tears. Jake laughed, a broken, wet sound, and pulled the dog closer with his free hand. He knelt there, a broken man, in a watery grave, holding a new life, being comforted by a stray dog. And in the distance, faint, but getting closer, he heard the sound, the beautiful, beautiful sound of sirens. Hope was coming. Sound of sirens, growing louder, closer, mixed with the faint, tinny sound of twinkle, twinkle. The wail of the sirens tore through the night, growing from a distant cry to a deafening roar. Red and blue lights flashed through the canopy, pulsing, turning the dark, rain-soaked ravine into a chaotic, nightmarish light show. Heavy boots slid down the embankment. Shouts echoed. "Down here! We're at the vehicle! Bring the basket!" Jake looked up, his face a mask of mud and tears. He was still kneeling, still clutching the tiny, crying child to his chest, shielding her. A paramedic, his jacket emblazoned with Brenner, slid the last few feet, his face a mask of professional calm. He took in the entire scene in 1/10 of a second. The mangled SUV, the overwhelming stench of gasoline, the dead woman in the front, and the deputy sheriff, weeping, holding a child. "Sir!" Brenner's voice was loud, sharp, cutting through Jake's fog. "Deputy, is the child responsive?" Jake couldn't find his voice. He just nodded, pushing the small blanket-wrapped bundle toward the medic. She's breathing," he choked out. "She was upside down, unconscious, but she's breathing." "Okay, I've got her. We've got her." Brenner and his partner were a blur of efficient motion. They had a pediatric stabilization board, a small, specialized basket stretcher. "She's severely hypothermic, deputy. We need to move. Now." They worked around Jake, their movements quick, sure. One cut the toy lamb from her hand, the music finally stopping. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the crash itself. They checked her pupils, listened to her tiny lungs. As they gently strapped her into the basket, the other medic, rooting through the mud, found the mother's purse. He pulled out a wallet. "ID, Sarah Nelson, driver's license." He paused, his light finding a photo tucked in the plastic sleeve. "Oh, God, there's a photo. The baby. Her name is Lily." Lily. The name was so simple, so beautiful. It hung in the air, a tiny spark of light in the middle of so much darkness. "Okay," Brenner said, lifting the basket. "We're moving clear the path." But the second they lifted the stretcher, Scrappy exploded. The little dog, who had been whining quietly at Jake's side, suddenly lunged forward. He barked, that same high-pitched, frantic shriek from the roadside. He wasn't barking at the medics. He was barking at the baby. He tried to jump into the basket to get to her. "Hey!" Brenner yelled, using his leg to block the muddy, frantic dog. "Get that dog back, deputy. We can't have a stray. It's a sterile field." "He's not a stray," Jake snapped, his voice hoarse, raw. "Bark! Bark! Bark!" Scrappy was losing his mind. He ran frantic circles around the paramedics, dodging their legs, trying to get to Lily. He was protecting her. And then, from the stretcher, a tiny, dirty, gloved hand moved. Lily, barely conscious, her eyes only fluttering open, heard the barking. She knew that bark. It was the sound that had been her only friend in the dark, upside-down world. Her little arm, weak, trembling, reached out from the blanket. She was reaching for the dog. Brenner stopped. He just stopped. He looked at the tiny, reaching hand, and then at the frantic, muddy dog. His professional mask cracked. "I'll be damned," he whispered. Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his bad ankle screaming, and scooped the muddy, soaking, trembling Scrappy into his arms. "No." The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It was the loudest sound in the ravine. Brenner looked up, bewildered. "Deputy, I can't. It's a sterile environment. It's against every protocol. We are transporting a critical pediatric patient." "He goes," Jake said again. His eyes were red-rimmed. His face was a mess of grief and mud, but his gaze was steel. "The dog goes with her." Brenner opened his mouth to argue again. He was an EMS professional. He had rules, but he stopped. He really looked at the man in front of him. A cop. Broken, covered in filth, holding a stray dog like it was a holy relic. He saw the look in Jake's eyes. It was the look of a man who had been to hell and back. A man who had just found a reason to climb out. It was a look that didn't just bend protocols, it broke them. Brenner let out a long, shaky breath. This is the craziest night of my life." He nodded to the back of the ambulance, its lights pulsing at the top of the ravine. "Get in, both of you. Just keep him contained. And for God's sake, don't tell my supervisor." Jake nodded, a sharp, grateful nod. The climb up was agony, but this time, Jake wasn't alone. Firefighters hauled the stretcher up with ropes. Jake climbed right behind them, one hand on the rope, the other holding Scrappy tight against his chest. He climbed into the bright, warm chaos of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in, Lily was already hooked up to monitors, tiny beeping sensors. Jake collapsed onto the bench seat, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The adrenaline was finally starting to fade, leaving him shaking and hollow. He looked down at the little dog in his lap. Scrappy was trembling, not from cold, but from the vibration of the engine, the whine of the siren. He was still whining softly, his eyes fixed on the tiny form of the baby on the gurney. Jake put his hand on the dog's head, stroking the wet, matted fur. He thought about what would happen next. The hospital, the reports, and animal control. They'd take the dog. They'd label him a stray. They'd put him in a concrete kennel. A hero. In a cage. No, Jake whispered, so low only the dog could hear. You're not going anywhere. He held the dog tighter. He knew, with a sudden, stunning, absolute clarity, that this dog was not leaving his side. This was not a stray. This was fate. This was the universe giving him something, a second chance, a sign. You're coming home with me, Jake murmured, his voice thick, the tears starting to well up again. You hear me, Scrappy? I don't care what they say. You're done. You're home. Sound of a hospital, soft beeping, quiet chatter. A few weeks had passed. The cold, relentless rain of that night had given way to the crisp, clear blue of a Seattle autumn. The sterile white halls of Seattle Children's Hospital were a world away from the mud and the darkness of the ravine. Jake Callahan walked down that hall, his boots clicking on the polished linoleum. He wasn't in uniform today, just jeans and a flannel shirt. He felt lighter. He stopped at room 305. Inside, a little girl was laughing. He pushed the door open. Lily, the baby from the wreckage, was sitting up in a small hospital bed, surrounded by stuffed animals. She was going to make a full recovery, no permanent damage. A miracle. A man, tall, with tired, grateful eyes, stood up immediately as Jake entered. This was Lily's father, Mark, who had been on a business trip in Asia when the crash happened. When he'd lost his wife, he rushed forward, his hand outstretched, his eyes brimming with tears. Deputy, he started, his voice thick. Deputy Callahan, my God, how do I ever thank you? His handshake was strong, desperate, the grip of a man who had almost lost everything. Jake just nodded, his own throat tightening. Please, call me Jake. I'm just glad I could be here. I'm glad she's okay. She's okay because of you, Mark insisted, his voice breaking. You saved her. Jake shook his head, slowly. His gaze drifted from the father to the little girl on the bed. She wasn't alone. Curled up on the blankets, right next to her, was a small, clean terrier mix. His fur was now a soft, scruffy golden brown. He was wearing a new blue collar. He lifted his head when Jake entered, and his tail gave a small, happy thump against the mattress. Lily giggled, burying her hands in his fur. Don't thank me, Jake said, and his voice, it was different. The cold, hollow rasp was gone. It was warmer now, fuller. It was the voice of a man who had come back. He pointed to the dog. Thank him. I was just following orders. Mark looked at the dog, confused. His name is Liam, Jake said, the name feeling strange and right on his tongue. He's the one who found you. He's the one who wouldn't give up. I just drove the car. Sound of a door opening, keys in a lock, a happy, excited bark. The sun was setting, casting long shadows into Jake Callahan's apartment, but the apartment wasn't dark anymore. It wasn't empty. He stepped inside, and before he could even close the door, a small four-legged missile of pure joy came tearing around the corner from the kitchen. Hey, buddy, Jake laughed, dropping to one knee, as Liam, formerly Scrappy, launched himself into his arms, covering his face in wet, happy licks. His tail wagged so hard his entire body shook. Jake held the dog close, burying his face in the warm, soft fur, the sound of the small, happy whimpers filling the silence that had haunted this place for 5 years. He stood up, walking into his home, not with a sense of dread, but with a sense of purpose. He looked around. A chew toy was on the floor. A water bowl was by the sink. It wasn't just an apartment anymore. It was a home. The little dog, the stubborn, impossible miracle of a dog, hadn't just saved one life that night in the ravine. He'd saved two. Narrator, warm, reflective, emotional. The story of Deputy Jake Callahan and the little dog he named Liam is a powerful reminder. It teaches us that sometimes, in our absolute darkest moments, when the world feels cold, when the rain is pouring down, and we are so tired, so broken, that we are ready to just give up, loyalty can appear in the most unexpected shape. It doesn't always arrive with a flash of light. Sometimes it's just a tiny, trembling, muddy creature refusing to let you go. Jake was a man who had lost his way. He was a good man, a brave officer, but he was drowning in a grief so deep he had forgotten what it felt like to even want to be saved. He had sealed his heart in ice, convinced he was destined to always be too late. He was ready to let the world and himself just fade into the gray. But fate, in the form of a stubborn, half-drowned puppy, had other plans. A creature that shouldn't have had the strength to survive the night, let alone fight a police cruiser, saw something in Jake. He didn't see a uniform. He didn't see a grieving father. He just saw help. He saw his only chance, and he refused, absolutely refused, to let Jake give up. He bit, he pulled, he barked, he clawed his way into Jake's life and demanded that he follow him into the darkness. He forced Jake to face the very thing he had been running from for 5 years, a rainy night, a car crash, and a life on the line. That night, in that cold, muddy ravine, Jake Callahan thought he was on a mission to save a life, but the truth is, 2 lives were saved, and his was one of them. Liam didn't just lead him to Little Lily. He led Jake back to himself. He forced him to feel again, to fight again, and to hope again. He reminded him, and all of us, that even after the most devastating storm, life can find a way. A little dog's loyalty didn't just save a child, it saved a man. Loyalty has no language, courage has no size, and love, true unconditional love, has no limits. The bond forged that night in the rain between a broken man, a helpless child, and a dog that refused to give up is a testament to the fact that heroes don't always wear a badge. Sometimes that they have 4 paws, a wet nose, and a heart bigger than the storm they're facing. It reminds us that the most profound connections we make are often the ones we never expected, that a life deemed stray or lost can be the very one that finds us. Liam, the little dog who fought a car and won, showed the world that you are never too small, never too weak, and never too broken to make a miracle happen. If this story of incredible loyalty and second chances touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video so we know we're bringing you stories that matter. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. And of course, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story that proves how amazing these animals truly are. And really, we love to know where our stories are traveling. It means the world to us. Please, drop your country or your state in the comments below. Let us know where you are watching from. Thank you for being here. And remember, always listen to the animals. They often speak a truth that we humans have forgotten how to hear.